I get a little dance? Can I get little shoulders? There's Peter.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Profit Power Hour. Welcome, Peter. What are you laughing about?
Just because I got in right at the wire.
Right at the wire. He's here. He's barely on time. We'll take it. Welcome to our September episode, Stop Automating Chaos, How to Identify and Fix Inefficient Processes or Processes. I imagine we'll have a debate about that on our call today, no matter what software you use. My name is Brad Johnson, and I am your co-host, as Danny has been helping me out lately through my travels, but I am back and ready to get going. I am the CEO of ProfitCoach, a company that helps entrepreneurs expand their freedom of time, money, and purpose by building highly profitable, self-managing companies. By ProfitCoach law, bylaw section 225, line 7, I have to show you a picture of my beautiful children. Here they are. This is from last week, having a good time at the beach. Don't have a professional photographer on standby like my friend Daniel, so I just have to crop out other kids. You'll see them over here and show you what I've got.
I'm not sure the bylaw allows you to submit an updated photo. I think the bylaws require a 5-year-old picture of your family.
A 5-year-old picture, yes, which includes an inaccurate count of the number of children that I have.
Exactly.
The case for Danny every time he shares a photo. So thank you for that correction. I will bring it to the board. That voice you hear is Peter Lohmann, CEO of RL Property Management and the co-founder of Crane. Before we continue, I want to give Peter the microphone here for a minute to tell you about something very excited coming up next week.
Thanks, Brad. So I'm really excited. We are doing our first ever live launch webinar for Crane. So Crane is a paid private community for property management business owners. We only open up for new members twice a year. And so our fall membership drive is opening on Friday. And on September 30th, which is early next week, we are having basically a huge party launch webinar. We've saved up a ton of announcements and new benefits for members, current members and new members. And we are also going to be giving away 1 free year of Crane membership to a new member who is live, who attends live.
Okay.
So, and there's going to be a huge list of other big announcements. So if you're a current Crane member, or if you've been thinking about joining Crane, or you want to learn more about what the heck is it, and you've seen people wearing these pins at conferences, go ahead and register, and I will drop the link in the chat if you don't feel like getting your camera out for a QR code.
Sounds good. Yes, thank you. And we at ProfitCoach are Crane partners, proud to partner with Crane and be a part of that community, have found it to be valuable for us as well. And when you join Crane, there's a level of access you have to myself and some others from our team as well that's a little unique from, I guess, the standard public. So thank you for that. Scan that QR code, click on that link if you're interested in signing up. I'll be on that webinar. You'll see my face for a brief moment as well, and looking forward to it. Okay.
Kelsey's a Crane member as well, by the way. So
she's a Crane member, and she's here.
I'm here.
Owner of Honest Property Management, excuse me. I'll come back to the three of you in just a moment for a little bit more of an intro while we do a poll question. But thank you for being here, Kelsey, process wizard, and glad to have you here. And then Zach Bennin, our very own lead process designer at ProfitCoach, one of the sharpest operational minds I have met. Thrilled to have Zach on the call too. All right, as always, if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A box. We will handle all of your questions, so please put them in there. And yes, let's get going. How to identify and fix inefficient processes, no matter what software you use. But first, can you draw a pig? This is a quick thought experiment for you. So let's say our panelists were all employees at the same PM company. Peter is a portfolio manager. and one of his clients asks him to draw a pig. I don't know why that was the request, but we've all been asked even stranger things as property managers than to draw a pig. I'm sure we can all attest. So Peter draws a pig, and the client loves it, and everyone is happy. But a few weeks from now, while Peter's out on a crane break, see what I did there? The owner needs another pig drawn. So Kelsey draws a pig instead. And here's what happens. She draws the pig and sends it to the owner. So Kelsey's pig, totally different. If you've ever done this exercise, there are a number of illustrations you can make with this exercise. But if you've ever done it, everybody draws a pig entirely differently. That's not necessarily a wrong way, but their pigs are different and they're not what the client expected. Okay. Again, going down the line of thinking here, Kelsey has to start from scratch. She doesn't get to see Peter's pig. There's no steps, there's no guideline, there's no instructions. She just has to come up with her idea of what does a pig look like. And finally, it brings this point to a head of there's a lack of standardization. Everyone's drawing pigs their own way. Everyone is actually completing the task of drawing a pig, but the company ends up with 5 versions of the same thing, and the client gets a totally different experience each time. And I will just quickly testify to this. The company that I took over 4 or 5 years ago, this was my situation. I had a portfolio style management and I had everybody running their own small business, and there was a severe lack of standardization in process. So that is all to say, this is why process matters. It's not just internal efficiency, it's also a consistent client experience. And when the experience is inconsistent, bad things happen. So we're going to get into what that looks like through these topics. So first, what comes first, process or software? Then we'll talk why process design is integral to your operational efficiency. Then we'll look at how to design an efficient process by 3 people who have done a lot of that work, and ask this question, when can automation fail? Automation is the exciting, maybe even sexy part of the technology tools that we are all often using, but when can it fail and how do we use it and leverage it correctly? So what's the most common operational bottleneck you find yourself having to solve? We're going to throw a poll up here. What's the most common operational bottleneck you find yourself having to solve? Maybe it's all of them, but I said most common, so you have to pick one. Organizing tasks into a streamlined system, building timelines that keep things on track, assigning the right tasks to the right people, and improving communication across the team or with clients, as well as documenting processes that are stuck in someone's head. Okay, I'm now, while you're filling that out, going to go back to our panelists and say, give me the brief overview of who you are, what you're doing, and why you are here to talk about process. What's your background in process design and management? Ladies first. Kelsey, go for it.
Thank you, Brad. I'm really happy to be here. I'm the owner and CEO of Honest Property Management. We are based out of Maine, and I remote manage from Charlotte, North Carolina. We've been in business for about 400 years, managing 200 doors. And before that, I did my MBA at the MIT Sloan School of Management with a focus on operations management and process improvement. And did that because I wanted to go into hospital management, which I was just talking with Zach before we started, which is so ripe for needing operational improvement and efficiency. So for about 12 years, that's what I did. Clinical workflows, how to improve patient and physician workflows to get the desired health outcomes and make everyone's day a little bit easier. And throughout that, we actually, with some professors back at MIT, we wrote up what we did. That's how much I loved this discipline. And that case study was published. It's now part of the curriculum at MIT, as well as many other business schools worldwide. So I'm having fun taking everything I learned in that career and transplanting it over to property management.
Yes, sounds good. You have a question here in the chat. Did you say that you've been in business for 400 years?
4 years. 4 years.
Okay. So we have our first
I look
fact.
good. I look really good for my age.
Yeah, Trey says it just feels that way. Yes, the dog years calculation is on point here in property management. All right, then we'll go over to Zach. Zach, tell us a little bit about your background in process design. It's pretty unique and rather interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Brad. Super excited to be a part of the conversation here today. So just a little background on me. I started off my career in the industrial engineering side of things. So a lot about what's process improvement, what's continuous improvement, how do we look and really engineer a system to be efficient, to be really productive in the space. So spent the first several years of my career in the distribution and manufacturing world. Got to really learn what does it look like to take a viewpoint of a physical process, something that's very clear and evident, and really improve it, cut out waste, and streamline business operations that way. And the past few years have now kind of pivoted and have gotten into the property management world, which has been, as Kelsey said, really fun to now translate that experience and that kind of view of looking at the world, looking at processes, looking at problems, and now apply that to the property management space. Because even though it's different, processes are all the same. Property management is just full of process from start to finish. So it's been fun to apply those same kind of guidelines in this world.
Yeah, that's awesome. And a big reason I wanted to have you on this podcast or on our webinar is you've really changed and transformed a lot of my thinking on this as well, taking those industrial design. How do you set up a factory for maximum efficiency? Like that's not that different than how do you weave through these different processes and make them efficient. So glad you're here. Thanks for your insight. And then Peter, over to you, and then we will reveal our poll results and launch into it.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. My background is electrical engineering, and I worked as a control systems engineer for 5 years right out of college. I designed hardware and software control systems for huge natural gas compressor stations and big engines that push natural gas down pipelines. And I also love taking insights from that world and bringing them into property management. I own RL Property Management here in Columbus, Ohio. As mentioned, I'm also the co-owner of Crane with Wolfgang Kroski, and I also own an engineering firm and some real estate with my partner in the management company. So, but I'm really just a process nerd at heart. I started before anyone even knew my name. I was documenting processes at my company, trying to work with software, which was very limited at the time, to streamline our processes, and famously ended up compiling all of our SOPs into a huge Notion knowledge base, company wiki type thing that I sold for a while and is now available to Crane members. So I love all things process and systems.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, and thanks for coming. So, ending the poll, sharing the results right now. So, what is the most common operational bottleneck you find yourself having to solve? Is this showing up for you guys?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, highest response, improving communication across the team or with clients is number one. Organizing tasks into a streamlined system, number two, and then kind of fades down from there. So, timelines and assigning the right tasks, not as substantial as organizing the tasks and documenting the processes stuck in someone's head. That would have been my answer, was a lot of these people have worked here a very long time. They know exactly how to do their job, but it all lives here. And what if they get hit by a bus? We're going to be in a bad spot. So I will stop sharing that and we will move into our first topic, which is what comes first, process or software? So let's just kind of square up on this. Why is process important? Open-ended question. You can kind of take this wherever you want, but why is process important? I won't call on anybody here. Go ahead if you've got something here.
Well, I talk about policy being primary. Policy drives process, and then the process drives the technology. I see a lot of people, and any consultants that you talk to will talk about this till they're blue in the face. You can't solve a process problem with technology or with, AI or automation. The process itself, which should be defined outside of the technology and could be written on a piece of paper, is what matters. The technology that you use to implement the process can change and probably will change over time. The specific people that are executing the task will change over time. But if you don't have the process right, you're really going to spin your wheels by trying new technology solutions. And policy sets up how your processes work, what you're actually willing to do for your customers, the deliverable timelines, how things are done at your company. And so process is really the heartbeat that connects your policy and your technology.
Yeah, that's really good. It's really good. It sits in the middle and translates one to the other. Kelsey, Zach, how about you guys? Why would you say process is important in property management?
Yeah, I think similar to the example you gave at the beginning about drawing the pig, if you don't take the moment to define your process, you're going to end up with a bunch of different results. You're not going to have standardization. You aren't going to have control over your business. And then a bunch of other factors or KPIs that you might be tracking, right? Like keeping your labor expense down, keeping other expenses down. If you don't have a clear process, those expenses are going to get out of control pretty quickly. And it's going to really limit your growth.
Yeah. Zach?
Absolutely. And I agree with both of those points. I think one thing when I think of process that really comes to mind is, goal within business is getting from this spot of kind of chaos, confusion, overwhelm, lots of things going on, to kind of our ultimate goal is how do we get to a point of clarity, really understanding what's going on in our business and how are we actually driving value to our owners, to our tenants. And I think kind of the bridge between that is really fundamentally the process. It's kind of that roadmap of how do we get there consistently, how do we get there, and doing so at a really high pace and a really high value standpoint. So kind of starting with outlining our steps, our procedures is fundamental to kind of how we operate as a business at large. So, and as Peter said, I think software is a tool to help us kind of enable that process. But if we don't have a good process really defined and a really good pathway understood, the tools might not make the impact that we're envisioning or that we're actually hoping for. So I think process kind of fundamentally is where I always appreciate starting.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kelsey. Were you about to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, so I might be have a slightly different opinion on software versus process. I think you could actually start with either, as long as important caveat that you're never adopting a software thinking that alone will solve all your process problems, right? But over our time in Honest Property Management, we've gone from where everything was just in email or a Word doc to using Asana as our process tool to now we are on Lead Simple. And so much of our process has changed because of the software that we're using. So almost knowing what software you have can then determine, well, what tools are available to you that you could build into the process design itself to really maximize the efficiency of what the tool has to offer. So it may not actually be helpful to map out a whole process on paper without knowing which direction in software you're headed. You might want to do those simultaneously.
There's definitely something to that. I see a lot of people jump through many hoops to try and force specific tools and software to do things they really weren't built to do because that's the way we do it here. And there is a tension between the process as you would ideally like to see it executed in a perfect world versus the way it can actually work efficiently with the software available. I have a slide from a presentation I gave a couple years ago that says, contort your process to the tools. Basically, you need to be okay with adjusting your process to fit the tools that are available to you. If you try and do it the other way, you're just going to be banging your head against the wall, or you're going to be using like undocumented APIs and workarounds and manual steps. So kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth a little bit, but there's a give and take, and there's a tension here, and an inexperienced ops person or a process person will intuitively grasp where it's okay to alter the process because the tool sort of wants you to do it a certain way, and where you have to draw the line and say, absolutely not, that will break everything. We are not doing it that way. We're going to either find a different way or use a different tool.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree with both of you on that. So the one caveat that I always think of, and I feel like you guys are both kind of in the same perspective, is I feel like a lot of times people may get the perception that like a tool or a software essentially is the process, right? Like if we implement this software system, it will solve our problems just inherently. And I think both of you are kind of bringing it back to the core of that tool and that functionality is the process behind it. And we can kind of mold and mash the process and the technology together so that they work as synergistically as possible. But at a fundamental kind of standpoint, the process in which we kind of put into there is really kind of that key driver. You know, just having Lead Simple, for example, doesn't just make a process and a business more organized and streamlined. So that's one thought that I have, but I definitely agree. I think there's kind of a healthy tension between the two there.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, I want to move on while we're kind of in our definitional stage here to this question. We talked about process. We've talked about software. There's this other component, automation. Is automation the same as process? I will go, Kelsey, you are the one who gets to say no.
Yeah, I am definitely going to say no to this. Automation can help speed up your process or take away some manual tasks in your process. And that's great when that happens. They are not one and the same. So what I'm looking for when I go to automate is like, what am I doing where I have to manually let someone know that I'm done with this step and I need their input? Or when am I like manually doing anything, sending a communication or drafting a document or sending something, a notification to the tenant. So automation helps do those steps for me. So my time or a team member's time is needed less, but it just speeds up the steps. It does not replace them.
Yeah, Zach, Peter, any further thoughts on automation and the role automation plays in the process, if you will?
If Wolfgang was on here, he'd talk about his using a Roomba and it runs over some dog waste and spreads it all around the room. Talking about like just speeding up nonsense essentially is what you can do if you apply automation without having a good understanding of your process. So yeah, I mean, ideally you would eliminate steps when you're trying to optimize a process. If that's not possible, then you try to automate them, is how I think of it. And I run into a lot of people who get excited about process and they do too much. They make it too complicated, too automated, too involved. The type of people who have spreadsheets to track their spreadsheets. And anytime I hear someone come into my office and talk about, I made a spreadsheet, I'm disappointed because there's usually a way to use an existing tool or process that we already have to accomplish something, whatever we're trying to do. And adding tools and complexity and automation is sometimes the answer, but more often than not, streamlining what we've already got or automating what we've already got is a better answer.
Yes, 100%. I agree with that. I think it is very easy if we're just looking at automation first to automate the right things or to automate the wrong things. So I think really knowing your inputs, right? Automation is just amplifying what you're putting into it. So making sure that what you're actually utilizing it for is what you actually are aiming towards. That's the key. And then adding the automation onto that can really reap a lot of benefits. But as long as we're going in the right direction in the get-go.
Yes. Otherwise, as you're fond of saying, garbage in, garbage out.
Absolutely. Yep.
It's faster. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's shift to this question, which is very interesting to me, and I'm sure to many others, which is what makes a process good? We're talking about good processes. We're talking about this principle of process design, which I think, as everyone has made really clear, is not at all the same as I got this software, I'm going to automate everything in my business and we're going to be 10 times more efficient, which isn't necessarily the sales pitch from the software vendors, but I think the reception for a lot of folks is very much, oh, I'm going to get this. I don't have to change anything. I just have to implement this and everything's going to go better. And we're saying that's not necessarily the case. So if we have to back up and design a good process, what makes a process good? I'm going to go over just a few principles here, mostly from Zach's brain and the PM operation standards. So just as at a high level, a good process optimizes value and reduces waste. It's looking to do those two things throughout the life of the process. And you, as the designer or the editor of the process, are looking to do those two things. We created a resource for this last fall that actually everyone on this call was pretty involved with to help us do this. And in partnership with Crane as well, shout out down there on the partnership list. Happy to have Crane support there. So the PM operations framework, I'll go very quickly. Most of you are familiar with this. It answers the what and the when. So we took the core processes of property management and we broke them down into key milestones that you have to pass through in order to complete a process. So in this turnover process, you see that not all milestones in the process are created equal. You obviously have a starting and you have an ending, but in the middle, you have value-based milestones that actually provide value by going through that part of the process, and you have constraint milestones, areas where you're looking to minimize or maybe even eliminate that step. A good one here, owner approval and funds received. Man, if that's not one of the biggest constraints in the turnover process, I don't know what is, because it is. Getting the owner to actually approve it when they're on vacation in Japan, getting the funds received when they don't have any money. These are problems and they're constraints to overcome, and they're one of the biggest factors for the process taking too long. There it is. There's a hard copy of the PMOS from Peter. So just as a high level, that's how we think about process, and that's the resource that we've put out to help you look at your processes through that lens. It's pmopsstandards.com. So how do you design a good process? The question is, do you start by fixing the mistakes or designing a completely new ship? So I'll go back just to this question, leave it kind of open-ended, and then go to where do you start. But how do you design good processes? I'll start with Zach this time, since I know you work through this quite a bit in your head.
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually one thing I want to take one step back and just thinking about what makes a good process as well. So I think kind of that viewpoint of maximizing value, eliminating waste is really, really essential. I think one other factor that really comes into play when I think of process, and the PMOP standards does this too, in terms of looking at metrics, is thinking through kind of from an engineering side, we call it the lead time, right? So what's the overall time from start to finish? And as we're looking at developing a good process, the goal is to minimize that as much as possible. So in the PMOP standards, think of like days without revenue, think of turnover speed, think of days to market, those sorts of things, right? Starting to finish. And I think a lot of times there's a difference between, okay, how can we speed up steps in that process versus how can we actually accomplish that lead time faster? And that's what I think at the end of the day makes a really good, efficient process, because you can automate, you can speed up steps within that process all you want, but it might not always translate to accomplishing those tasks, accomplishing what's valued to your owner any faster. So I think that's kind of one fundamental thing that I like to think through. And I think those PMOP standards really helps to give you that framework. So I think when I think of like, how do we actually make this happen? The first thing that I always start with is let's define what that value is to our customers, right? What do they actually want us to focus on? And I think, again, PMOP standards does a really good job of indicating that. And then it's really kind of that series of, okay, what do we do today? Let's understand what our current state is in all of its glory, right? The good, the bad, what works well, what doesn't. Let's get that on paper, kind of out of our heads so we can visualize it. And now let's start putting on that lens of eliminating waste. So what are those constraints? What's the waste within that process? And as Peter said, our goal our primary goal is how can we eliminate as much of that as possible, right? I think, Brad, you brought up the example of the owner approval and funds, right? Okay, that is a really severe pain point that could be potentially really wasteful. So is there a way that we can kind of move that up the chain to either eliminate that or minimize that? Are there things that we can do all the way up in our PMA to set a standard turnover procedure and get that approval baked into the PMA that we can essentially eliminate that task altogether when it comes to the turnover? So thinking through that lens, I think is kind of the first core step there.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Kelsey, Peter, how do you guys think through the concept of designing a good process for your PM company?
Yeah, so for us, I think when you talk about a good process, people often think about the final output, right?
Hmm.
How fast does that unit turn? What percentage of leases did we get renewed on time? And yes, that's the key thing we're trying to achieve. So that is important. But I also think about what did it take from our team to get there? Because if we're all exhausted and stressed out and we had to do a bunch of duplicate work, then we don't have a good process, no matter how good that final outcome is, because that's not a sustainable way to achieve that. Another way you can achieve those outcomes is by throwing a bunch of people at it. That's really expensive, and it's going to send your labor ratio like way too high. So I usually spend actually more time thinking about what does it look like to get to the outcome than focus on that actual outcome itself. I believe that if your process is good, and it's designed for the outcome, then the outcome will take care of itself by having the right process along the way. And when Zach talks about reducing waste, that is a huge piece of what we do. And I think everyone on this call should know the acronym of downtime. So that stands for the 8 most common types of waste. I'll say it quickly and then you can easily Google this, but downtime is defects, overproduction, waiting, non-utilized talent, transportation, inventory, motion. This is a huge one. I'll give an example of that one in a minute. And then overprocessing, the second biggest one that I think comes up for property management. So motion, like literally how many clicks do you have to get up and walk over to someone's desk? Do you have to send too many emails? Overprocessing could be that we're just doing too much of something to achieve the final result. I see those two things come up for property managers all the time as a source of waste or inefficiency. So when you're designing process, pay attention to those 8 forms of waste and how often they come up. And if you slowly get those out, you'll have a good end result. And then the final point I'll make on this question is I love that you have good in quotes, and I'd say that is the key word here. In our process improvement efforts, we always emphasized this saying, which is perfect is the enemy of good. So when you see something you can fix, even if it's not the perfect solution, do it. Pull the trigger today. I can make a change in a lease that immediately starts a problem today. Great, old lease out, new lease in. I can go in the back end of Lead Simple and quickly change, oh, I need to turn an alarm clock on that thing. So someone now gets an email when that step's due because that step has been chronologically missed. Maybe that's not perfect, but I've instantaneously made incremental improvement starting today. And I really think people should focus on that as opposed to like, oh, if I designed Zap, it would be perfect, but it's going to take me 3 months to go learn how to use Zapier, right? That's perfect. Do that when you're further along. Don't do that out of the gates. Do the good first before you focus on perfect.
That's really helpful. Really helpful. Peter, I saw a lot of head nodding there. What you got?
Yeah. Kelsey, that was really interesting where you were talking about like the obstacles to a good process, like rework and motion. I would love to read more if you've written about that before, but all right. So a lot of thoughts here. The panelists did a good job of covering great outcomes. That's really important. Begin with the end in mind in everything you do, whether you're starting a company, beginning a project, or designing a process. What is the outcome I'm trying to deliver here? What's the deliverable? Define it really clearly and precisely. On the other side of the process is the trigger. A well-defined trigger is also very important. What kicks this off? Is this a every Monday thing? Is this a 10th of the month thing? Is this a if we get a notification of a chargeback thing? Like, get really clear on what triggers the process. If that's fuzzy in your mind, it's going to be really hard to design a good process. Couple other just miscellaneous ideas around building processes that I've learned the hard way. Don't design for edge cases. People tend to get caught up in the idea that a great process has to cover every conceivable possible situation. Not true. A great process works 80-85% of the time. There's always going to be weird stuff that happens. Some tenant is going to move from one unit you manage to another that's owned by a different owner. Your move out process may not cover that. Your move in process may not cover that. That's okay. Just bring someone smart in there and let them do that one time. You don't have to like create a custom field for that and conditional logic for something that happens twice a year. Now, if it's happening twice a week, maybe that's not an edge case anymore. But just be careful about letting these edge cases convolute and complicate your processes. I saw this great quote somewhere, put how to do it where you do it, right? So from the physical world, from the factory floor, hey, here's how to operate this machine. Here's a one-page placard laminated with step-by-step. In the digital world, we would put instructions on how to complete a task right where the task gets assigned.
And Peter, that placard, it's like on the machine.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. It's like hanging from a thing that's attached to the machine. Yeah. In Lead Simple, just because I'm familiar with it, you can add task instructions and you just have it right there. You don't have it some other doc somewhere that explains how to do the process.
Including a video, right? You can have a video.
Yeah. We use Loom videos all the time right in there. A great process to me has as few steps as possible, but no fewer. So a great process does not mean, I feel like sometimes people get the idea if they came and looked at my management company, I would have like these 100-page long processes. Quite the opposite. Short, simple is great. And where you can, go ahead and automate. But I think there is absolutely nothing wrong with a checklist. Now, we have all this fancy software these days, and it talks to other software, and there's all these automations. A great checklist is going to get you 90% of what you need. And it's kind of like the slow is smooth and smooth is fast. You ever hear that? It's kind of the same thing with processes. You want to start smooth and slow. And over time, as you build reps and as your team gets familiar, you can start to streamline and optimize and automate. But don't worry about that in the beginning. I've seen process implementations fail so many times because of overcomplicated, over-engineered process design when all you really needed was the digital equivalent of a 6-item checklist, honestly. Because what's more important is that everyone is doing it consistently every time. That's what matters, not that it happens and it updates Slack and then it goes to your dashboard and all that other. We can get to that. But you'd be amazed how many things in my company are still completely manual, honestly. And then the last thing I'll say is clear milestones or stages. And you touched on that, Brad, when you showed the operation standards. That's a great part of a great process. That was something that was a big upgrade for us when we did move to Lead Simple, was the paradigm of a milestone, which is just stage, which is just a major milestone in the completion of a process. So that lets you, as the business owner or someone who's in charge of a process, look at the 15 move-in processes that you have running concurrently right now and see which one of them is in which stage without having to know the specifics of every single task that's done or not done.
Yeah. That's really helpful. I want to move over to this question, which is, okay, you've got, let's say your property management company is a ship and you discover that it has a number of very large holes in it. How do you know whether or not you should fix the holes or it's time to build a new ship? So how do you know when to fix the mistakes or improve the process versus start over, redesign the process? I'll ask first, Kelsey and Peter, have you guys encountered this particular issue in your own companies? And if so, what did you do?
Yeah, we actually did something on this recently with our unit turn process. And I think that it starts with walking your process. And what I mean by that is getting all the people in the room who touch any part of that process. Don't assume that your process is working according to what you wrote down on paper or what you built in Lead Simple. You have to actually ask people, okay, the first step is that you get this notification goes out. What happens when you get it? And you have to really listen to what the answer is, because you might be like, oh, I'm not getting that notification. When is that triggered? Or they might say, oh, I immediately changed the due date because of this reason. Wait, what now? Tell me more about that, right? So you really, even when you're so certain, and as leaders in the company, man, do we sometimes do this, right? We just think we know. We think we know all the answers. So you really have to just let yourself ask those questions and really listen to what people say, because you're going to get so much information that way to respond to. And then I think the other part of this, if you're truly process oriented, don't blame your people, right? It can be really easy when a process starts breaking to be like, well, they're not looking at their inbox, or they're not paying attention to their tasks, or come up with whatever you want to blame people for. If they're good, right? You hired them, you think they're good, and they're not doing it when you think they should be doing it, before assuming that it's lazy or distracted or whatever, check your process. You might have built a process in a way that that person is not being set up for success. So I really encourage you to think about it through both of those lenses. And usually things can be fixed without, throwing everything out. Like, I think you can fix the mistakes, but it might not just be like a patch. You might have to like replace the whole side, right? Like, depends
Yeah.
on how big the problem is.
That's really good. How often do you walk the process? How often do you go through? Is there a rhythm here for you checking on this?
Yeah, honestly, not as often as I'd like to. I think Peter has a better process for like how they formally do this in his company. And that is something I've aspired to emulate for a while now. But I do look at triggers. So like if I see that something is consistently, a few times I've noticed, hey, the last 3 times we did this, like it didn't flow, it didn't work, or we didn't get the outcome we wanted. That is an immediate, there's a Japanese term around lean management called a jidoka. So you pull the thing, you stop the process, we all get in a room. Hey, why is this clunky? Why is it not working? Why didn't it go well? And you just let people talk, and you listen. So I pull, well, we don't have the formal process yet for like, okay, it's due to walk this one. We haven't talked about that. I'm very quick to pull that time out, and let's talk about it when I sort of notice that we're off track.
Yeah. Yep. That's good. That's good. So Peter, you can comment on this generally, but specifically, how often do you do essentially a process audit is what that sounds like.
Yeah, so your processes are never done, and you should revisit them on a regular cadence with the people who are doing the work, just like Kelsey said. So I believe these days we every other month have a process meeting, and it's a different process each time. The people who are involved with that process come together and step through it together on the screen, and we talk about, okay, are we still doing this? Is there something not on here that should be on here? Is there anything in the wrong order? Is there any typo? Like little things like typos and like mix matched like case or verb tense. That stuff bugs me in processes. So I like to take that opportunity to clean those things up. In terms of deciding how to approach a process problem, it's pretty rare that you're going to need to throw the whole thing out and start over. I mean, in property management, we're kind of doing the same stuff that we've always done: move in, move out, lease renewal, new client, all those fun things. And so I like to, if there's a problem, I like to first document what's already happening. And that can be surprisingly difficult, especially if it's a dysfunctional process, because it's one of these things where everyone kind of thinks somebody else is in charge, and it's really unclear when the task gets handed off between people. So you may need to do like a swim lane diagram, which is a fun way to diagnose a process, or just talk to everyone and get everything out on paper. And usually in the process in the steps that I'm taking to document a process, the solutions start to become pretty obvious. Like, oh, shoot, this is going back and forth 3 times between the same 2 people. If we just reordered some steps here, it would only be a single handoff instead of 3 back and forth. Stuff like that. Or you just like, these things just, I don't think I was the one that coined this term, but there's process depreciation. Every single day, entropy is ruining your processes.
That's
And
right.
it's like the Section 8 administrator changes how they do things, or your software updated how rent payments come through, or your sales team has a new form they collect from owners, and all of these things adjust how your processes need to work, and they slowly break and die over time, and they just need a little refresh. So that's how we think about it.
That's good. Zach, I'll give you a couple minutes here for your take on this as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think all of that insight is super valuable. One of the things that I think of is how do we kind of approach this process improvement game? I think there's kind of 2 ways to look at it. Is one, what is our foundation currently? And I think to Kelsey's point, I think of that as kind of like quality control, right? If I'm starting to see these specific trends, these consistent problems, that's usually a signal that something about the process at large is probably pretty broken and needs some actual like focused attention. Versus, hey, there's some annoyances that I kind of see along the way that are some opportunities for me to improve. And so if there's something where a process is truly broken, or even you're starting this whole process design journey from the get-go, right? And you don't really have a process defined, I think a great first step is to just build a firm foundation. Because a lot of times what I've noticed is if we just zero in on the problems that we feel and we're trying to solve all of those problems, we can do that. But a lot of times, sometimes we're kind of limited in our focus and our scope of thinking to just solving that problem. When if we take a step back and look at the bigger picture, think about the end in mind, think about kind of the flow of how do we move from the start to finish as efficiently and waste-free as possible, we can build that new ship, so to speak, and those problems that we are facing just kind of inherently go away, right? So if we're designing a good process and think about it, hey, as we're starting, how do we eliminate the constraints? How do we maximize the value? Those kind of small details kind of fade in the background. So I think if you're starting out, starting with that approach is kind of my first step that I always recommend. But then, as Peter mentioned, like that thought of continuous improvement, of continually evolving and updating your process, I think is absolutely essential. And Kelsey, I loved the acronym that you threw out there. I always think of it as Tim Woods as well. So same 8 wastes, just a little different order. But one of the kind of maybe an easy way to remember that and remember identifying waste is fix what bugs you, right? So if you have problems kind of thinking through, or issues remembering what exactly am I focusing on, a lot of waste is inherent based on like how you feel about it, right? So a lot of times if you're doing a process, if you're walking through things, there's something that just doesn't feel right, that's a little bit of friction that kind of bugs you inherently. A lot of times that's an opportunity to improve. And so as you're starting to get on this continuous improvement journey, having that mindset of not just you as a business owner, but also your team members having that same filter can be a really powerful tool to help build off of that already stable ship or foundation that you've built for yourself.
Yeah, that was a question that Betsy has right here in the chat. She said, what does that mean, build a firm foundation? So what do you mean when you say that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe the difference is if I approach that and I don't really have a process, or it is extreme chaos, rather than just trying to patch up all the individual holes in my sinking ship, to bring it back to your analogy, Brad, what I would do is I would kind of take a step back and think through, how can I build a ship, right? If I am not tied to what I do today for my move-in process, how would I actually construct a good move-in process from the get-go, with focusing on value, eliminating waste, a lot of those PMOS milestones that we have set up. And that would be kind of the foundation that I built to start from. And then you kind of build that continuous improvement. Once you've built that structure, you continuously improve upon that for days to come. Does that make a little more sense?
I think so. I'll let Betsy comment, but even if you just go through the thought exercise of doing that, and you're like, if I wasn't tied to this, and I could do this however I wanted to, and I could build this from scratch, what would it look like? And you sketch that out, and it looks entirely different from how you're doing it now. That's a pretty good indication that you might need to start over. Versus if you build it from scratch, at least as an exercise, and it's pretty similar, you may just have a situation where it needs to get better. You need to do an audit. You need to figure out where your time waste is and all of that, and make sure it's value added as well. So that
Absolutely.
hopefully that helps. Okay, so before we move on, a well-built system doesn't just save you time; it saves your entire team from confusion, wasted effort, and rework. Something that we have seen many times in the few years that we've been doing lead simple, aptly, some Realm-X flows, implementation, and seeing the results on the other side. So wanted to give you the opportunity to talk with Zach a bit more and see if that's helpful for you as you're going through this exercise. So we're going to put out a poll. If you would like to schedule a consultation with Zach for free to design a process that saves your team hours each week and reduces daily chaos, you can respond to that poll, or you can scan this QR code right here, which is a direct link to his calendar. You can get some time with him and walk through this. He'll help you identify your best starting point. What's the area of your business that will unlock the most impact with the least amount of friction? You guys can go through the exercise of mapping a high-level process design, taking these principles, taking the truths that we've heard on this webinar and implementing those for your own business, outlining the milestones and the metrics, using the PMOS kind of as that foundation, and then get some clear next steps to kick off implementation and score your first early win. That can be with us, that can be on your own. We want to be able to try to help you and resource you to do this really well, because it is difficult. It's simple in some ways, but it's not necessarily easy. And Zach can be a really helpful guide as you go through that. So scan the QR code if you want to get on his calendar, or just select yes here and we'll reach out to you. Either way works. All right, let's finish up here with a question about automation. So Kelsey brought this up just a minute ago. When a process isn't working, how do you know if it's a people problem or a system problem? Her caution was, beware to just blame your people. You're lazy, you didn't follow the steps, you got this wrong, etc. So Kelsey, since you brought that up, I'm going to give you the floor here. How do you discover when something breaks, when something's inefficient, if it's a process problem or a people problem?
Yeah, I by default assume it's a process problem. That is how I go into it to start. And then you ask the questions, you give them a chance to say it. Now, sometimes if it is a people problem, they let you know, because they'll say things like, "Oh, I got the reminder, but I don't know, I guess I just whatever." Like, they don't have a good answer. So it's just kind of like, in interviewing, right? You can tell a good answer when you ask like a strategic question versus someone who's not prepared and doesn't have. But I always start from the assumption that it is a system problem. And then I think when you identify those system problems, if there is someone who's not keeping up or seems to be struggling with it, then you can start to have like more of those one-on-ones. Hey, we went through that whole process design, you participated, you had some good feedback. I've noticed that you're still having, these tasks are still not getting completed by the deadlines we set as a team. What's going on, right? And then people will be the outlier, right? If the whole team starts moving in one direction towards improvement and you have your outlier, that becomes pretty obvious. But that is when it's obvious after you've been through your process improvement process. And it's not the starting place. It's sort of that you can tell when there's a lag there and someone's getting left behind. And that's when that people problem starts to emerge. It is not the starting place.
Yeah, that's really good. Peter or Zach, how do you discover people versus process problem?
Yeah, Kelsey and I have talked before about like always go into it with the assumption that it's a process problem, and I'm completely aligned with her on that. That needs to be the culture at your company, is that when there's an issue, you come in as the boss, not with a blaming type attitude or who's to blame for this, but with a, oh, interesting, there must be a breakdown here. Let's work together and find it. That is going to really bring out the best in your people, and it's going to be really valuable for you because they typically know more than you do about how the process works. So, and more generally, as a leader, just so you know, if no one's told you this, it's always your fault. And you need to internalize that hardcore and operate your whole life like that. Because if it's a process problem, well, you're the guy who designed or gal who designed the process or didn't. And if it's a people problem, you're the one that hired them or hired the person who hired them. So it's always your fault, and that's okay. That's actually great because it means you can fix it because you are empowered now. You're not a victim. I think a rule of thumb that I use is if we're talking about leadership dysfunction, it's typically a people problem. If we're talking about frontline team members, it's typically a process problem. That's been true for me about 80% of the time, not 100%. If you are trying to diagnose this at your company, specifically for kind of frontline team members executing processes, I would again enter into it with the assumption that there's a system issue or a process problem. If you're not sure after some investigation, you think maybe you've got a people problem, like just a bad team member, run them through the people analyzer, the EOS people analyzer, which to summarize just means, do they get it? Do they want it? And do they have the capacity to do it? So that's called GWC. And then run them against your core values, grade them against your core values. If you just Google EOS people analyzer, you'll get a little cheat sheet on this. It's very helpful. You will know after you've completed that exercise and maybe asked a couple other people who work with or who manage that person to complete the same exercise, have a discussion. That will help you diagnose if it's a people problem and give you some direction on how to solve it. If it's like, no, they get it, want it, have capacity to do it, they meet our core values, then you've got a system problem that you'll just work with them to solve.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think kind of the key distinction there between being accusatory and being genuine has to do with you being genuinely curious. Like you have to get to the place where your spirit of curiosity and kind of team level commitment to solving the problem doesn't impact you making a decision on what the problem is before you've actually discovered the problem. So I think that you kind of hit on that curiosity mindset. Zach, close it out for us. How do you know if it's a people problem or a system problem?
Yeah, and I agree with both of them. My fundamental default is always it is a process or system problem before it is a people problem. And maybe one kind of gap in there that I would fill is it a process problem? Is it the way that I've like integrated it into my company problem, or is it a people problem? Because sometimes the process can be good, the person could be good, but the way that I've integrated into the team or went about trying to get buy-in was broken in and of itself. And so one thing that I have learned when it comes to continuous improvement, when it comes to process design, is that at a technical level, you can have a great defined process, but if you're not able to integrate it into your team well, you're not able to reap the rewards from it, right? A lot of change management comes a lot more from how do we adopt it as a team and adapt to it, as opposed to how do we structurally build it. And so I think that's a key element to remember is think through, how do I bring this system into the culture of my business? How do I get people engaged in what I'm doing and see like a sense of urgency of the value that it brings? How do I overcome any roadblocks or frustrations that they may have with that? And how do I help to establish the mindset of continuous improvement and that eagerness to get better and better within my organization? And so I think that's where I would always resort to as kind of that middle gap is how do we engage our team to build this in fundamentally as well?
Yeah, yep, that's really helpful. I threw on the chat there as well. Sometimes it's a training problem. Sometimes people don't know how to use it. They don't know why it was built. They don't know where it lives, they're using it incorrectly. So that people part, and just to keep playing on the metaphor or the joke, that's still your fault because you didn't train your people well. Real quick before we go, Taylor Haas has a question. Peter or anyone, have you had success with the EOS exercise of right person, wrong seat, and making changes within your team? So very quick context on that. There's two things. There's the right person. Is this the right person for my organization? And then, like, should they be on the bus? And then wrong seat or right seat. Are they in the right seat on the bus? So have any of you, I'll give my take on this at the end. Have any of you had success with identifying a right person who was in the wrong seat that you could move to the right seat and seen success for your business?
I'm having trouble thinking of a specific time that we did that. Probably just because we run kind of small businesses, all of us. There's just not that many people and not that many, opportunities to switch. I see Sam mentioned that he did have success with that. I love the idea of it in theory, great person. They get the core values. They're just in the wrong seat. It's just rare in my experience that I have an opening for another role and I have someone who is, gets the values but is in the wrong seat. So that's been my experience. I like the idea of it though. I'm sure it does work.
Yeah, Kelsey, have you seen that?
Yeah, we actually did have that about maybe 4 or 5 months ago now. So we, we've been growing pretty quickly. And so we had someone who was with us from almost the beginning. And as we grew and adopted Property Meld, it was sort of natural for her to be in that sort of maintenance coordinator function. But her skill sets up until that point had been around solving problems with tenants, front-facing customer service, and sort of managing the dashboard and owning maintenance issues was really just, you could see all of a sudden that there was a little drop off because it wasn't aligned with her skills. So the very next time we had a growth opportunity on our team, I moved her back into a role that was aligned with her natural skill sets. And then I hired a new maintenance coordinator to take over that function. And it's been beautiful. And I feel like the sign that it was successful is that both the person outgoing is like really admirable of her skill set, and then she said, oh my gosh, you hired the exact right person for that role, and she's so happy and relieved. So yeah, it is hard to do that in small companies. It does help if you're growing because then you can add a seat as opposed to just having to switch. But we were lucky that we had that opportunity and it worked out.
Yeah, that's really good. My answer to this, just as we wrap up, is a resounding yes. This has happened to me at Sawyer Property Management and at ProfitCoach, where we've just had really high quality people that were excellent cultural fits, really smart, and they were just hired for the wrong thing because we and they incorrectly assessed what they were naturally gifted at, or the position changed and shifted a lot. And so that required a change as well. Sam, that's funny. I won't tell him you said that. But there is some truth to that he made the joke about Danny and I. He was obviously very, very good at this. He just needed to do something a little bit different within the organization and within the rest of his professional career. But I've seen that work. Sam's example was mine at our property management company, a process person doing people stuff and a people person doing process stuff. That was really relevant. And just like, I'm sure you've all heard this, you've probably experienced this. Sometimes the best thing you can do for a person who is in the wrong seat or in the wrong company or in the wrong job is to let them go. That's actually what is best for them. They just don't know it yet. I've certainly experienced that. Moving their seat, as Taylor's example illustrates, that can be too. And if you find a ton of resistance to moving the seat, then you may actually have a bit of a people issue there too, and not just a seat issue. People love their jobs. I understand that. But sometimes they don't know what they don't know. And you kind of have to force the issue to help them see, hey, I and everyone around me can see this. You can't necessarily see this right now because you're a little blind to it. This move may make a big difference for you and open your eyes. So those are obviously hard decisions. And yeah, I'll just leave it there on that since we're over time. Last thought here as I close this out. Managing a team is complex, and having a space to share challenges and ideas makes all the difference. Just highlighting a few things here. This webinar, thank you for coming. Thank you for being a part of this. I think it really helps build community in property management. Obviously, Crane is a great application for this as well. That is a space to do this very thing, to share challenges, to share ideas, and to build community, both online and at conferences. And then, of course, if you're not part of our community at ProfitCoach, we invite you to explore that. We have a mastermind community. We also do some in-person meetup type things. But all of that to say, just the general point of community in property management, which can be a lonely, sometimes difficult business, especially in certain seasons. Important for us to help each other and rely on each other. And glad you shared this time with us today. Thank you so much to our panelists. And with that, we will close it out. Thanks a lot. Here's my contact info, our company's website, if you want to check us out. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.